Okay, that 2032 asteroid that had, as of 3 days ago, like a 2+% chance of hitting us.
Is it going up or down?
It's been downgraded to basically nothing, and I actually don't know how to feel about it. I'm not sure how I feel about that.
And I was excited.
Yeah.
Look, okay, here's the thing. Do I, in the year of our Lord 2025, feel like we as a species could come together to prevent a city/region destroying asteroid from impacting some probably not entirely identified place on the planet? Absolutely not. Under any circumstances do I think that is a thing that we as a species are prepared to deal with right now.
Agreed.
Would it be really, really amazing to watch it happen, assuming you don't live in the potential destruction path? Probably less so than I think right now, but I was curious how it was going to go.
Sure. Yeah.
I read Seven Eves. I know how this works.
I'm not quite irony poisoned enough yet to think it would be fun to watch an asteroid impact the planet. But yes, something about the scenario that you have just described was intriguing, at least.
I mean, look, there's a global cooling aspect to it that could be really good.
That's true.
You know, we put a bunch of particulate in the air for a few years. It just cranks us back to 1960s levels.
Let's try a nuclear winter for a little bit.
Well, no. That has other consequences there.
I mean, is it not still considered a nuclear winter?
No, because you have to have the bombs to do the nuclear winter.
Well, I know,
it's just equivalent. It's roughly equivalent.
I thought the radiation was optional, though. I thought it was just surround the planet with a dust cloud for long enough, and that counts.
I think that's just cloud winter. I think nuclear winter implies that we bomb ourselves into like a road situation, and then it's just Viggo Mortensen and a can of peaches.
So is there such a thing as a volcanic winter?
We had that in the 1800s, right? When Krakatoa went.
Yes. Oh yeah. We've had that many times.
Well, I mean, but like in recorded history, it's happened a couple of times. So
yeah. Okay. Volcanic winter is a term, actually. Yeah. So I guess nuclear winter does in fact have to involve nuclear weapons.
Yeah. I assume that like if the frogs get wild and out of control, we could have a frog winter even right? Like, like, or what if, consider a sky algae, right? Yeah. We get a sky algal bloom that turns all the clouds black. And then next thing you know, maybe that's a sky algae summer.
Yes, I would have liked to watch some kind of deflection scenario play out successfully. Like which one would they go with? There's so many.
Here's the problem with the deflection scenario, just generally speaking, I think, is that we're not capable of getting our shit together fast enough to do like the slow and steady. Like, hey, let's just apply a little bit of force to this thing over a long period of time. Yeah, because we're as a species kind of dipshits. We would do let's just wait until the last minute and then pop off the bomb, send Bruce Willis and Ben Affleck up there.
Yes, Armageddon has much to answer for.
Yeah, and then instead of it like being an easy 100% clean miss, we would mess up in some important way. Somebody wouldn't carry a zero and we'd fire it into New York. Yeah,
say what you will about Don't Look Up, but they were probably onto something with the end of that movie.
That was maybe the most depressing movie I've ever seen in my life.
Now that you mention it, every time I saw this asteroid thing talked about on social media, the number of replies from people who were very excited about just blowing it up.
Yeah.
Makes me happy that we're just not going to have to deal with it.
Look, man, the president once said, hey, why don't we stop this hurricane by firing a nuke or two at it? And that's the mindset we're dealing with here. These are not our best and brightest minds in charge.
Hey, man, nuclear weapons. What problems can't they solve?
Welcome to Brad and Will Made a Tech Pod. I'm Will.
I'm Brad. I am Brad, it turns out. Still, continue to be.
I have so many Brads in my life now, it turns out. Really? Well, Brad Charkis over PC World.
Right, yes.
2Xing Brads these days.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Wait, you going to do Brad Muir like that?
I don't see Brad Muir anymore. He went to Valve and disappeared.
Yep.
That's what happens to everybody who goes to work at Valve. You're like, That's right. Hey, man, I used to see you all the time. Nope, never again.
That's right. Vanished into the Valve vortex.
Yeah.
He's not the only one I know.
He's in there cranking out Deadfall or what's that game? What's their not Dota for first person Dota?
I'm starting to worry about myself. I should be able to remember things like this. It's Deadlock, right?
Deadlock.
I mean, in my defense, there are a lot of dead blank games on Steam.
Yeah, it's not a great name.
Deadlock? Yes, Deadlock.
Deadlock.
There's a boomer shooter that came out in the last few years. I hate the term boomer shooter, but I just used it because that ship has sailed.
Look, it's the Metroidvania of this decade. We just got to suck it up and get used to it.
It's not Deadlock. It is, what is it called? I can picture the box art, the quasi box art on Steam of this other game I'm talking about right now in my head, but I can't remember the name. It's Dead something.
Dead Link.
That's the other
Dead
one.
Link
Yes.
rips. Dead Link is really good.
Oh, have you played it?
Yeah, I played it. I have played 22 hours of it according to Steam.
Okay, that's like way beyond. I'm just going to play this on a stream. That's actually playing a game.
Also, I'm going to tell you, it is not a boomer shooter. It just kind of looks like one. It's
really?
roguelite. Yeah, it's really good.
Maybe I should check that out.
It has a good progression. The boss battles are fun. It's smart.
Also, it's way newer than I thought. It's like 18 months ago.
Yeah, I played it. I played it last year quite a bit.
But no, I have not played Deadlock, the Valve's third-person Dota.
I played that with a friend of the show, Matt Kessler, and friend of the show, Ben Pack, when the beta was new, and I'm not capable of learning that kind of complicated. There's too much.
Yeah, it does a lot.
Oh man, Brad,
what?
The ice cream truck is outside.
Oh no,
it's outside my door.
What, you're going to tell me my DBX was jacked up again?
No, I'm going to text my wife and tell her that the ice cream truck is outside. I'm going to tell her to get me something. We can just put this in. This is my life.
Okay. All right. Well, internet enabled ice cream truck. Here we go. What are your ideas for enhancing the ice cream truck experience with modern connected internet technology?
Well, so the ice cream truck has an app, right? It
already does.
Yeah, I can open the app and see where it is in the neighborhood on ice cream truck day. But I wish it gave me a notification in the morning. It was like, hey, the ice cream truck's going to be in your neighborhood at like 3:00. Because then I could prepare. Like sometimes I don't have pants on, and then I have to walk further down the street to get the ice cream. It's a real problem.
Pants on to go get the ice cream.
I mean, okay, I don't need pants, but I don't. Sometimes I'm sitting around in like a pair of flannel pants or like loungewear.
That's what, man. Flannel pants and ice cream trucks go together. Like,
I'm too old to walk to the ice cream truck in my jammy jams. I think.
All right,
you know what I'm not too old to do?
What is that?
Turn Qs into A's.
That's right. It's a lifelong pursuit.
It's every week, every month. I know that the end of the month is coming when it's time to turn Qs into A's. Now this week.
Yeah. No, I mean, actually, scientists have determined, physicists have determined, I don't know if you know this, they have determined the quantity of Qs in the universe will always exceed the quantity of A's.
Really?
Until the end of the universe, the quantity of A's will never exceed that of Qs.
Is this like an entropy situation?
Yep, I believe that's the case.
Wow, that's crazy.
Every A begets 2 additional Qs.
Wow. I should have known. So we're hastening the end of the universe by answering all these Qs and turning them to A's.
Pretty much.
If you have a Q that you would like to turn into an A, you can send it to techpod@content.town, or alternately, you can, if you're in the Discord, which you can get to by subscribing to the Patreon by going to patreon.com/techpod, giving us $5 a month, getting access to the Discord and a wonderful community of delightful nerds, and also the patron exclusive episodes. And
it's Bottomless Q Hole.
Yeah, we have a Q. We should rename that the Q Hole.
The Q Hole.
Yeah, because that's what it is. Like people post Qs, the Qs disappear. It's like a bottomless Q hole.
That's right. It is.
Anyway, you can post your Qs there. We will turn them into A's maybe on the next questions seeking answers episode.
That's right.
And this is I thought this wasn't the last episode of the month, but it actually is, isn't it?
Technically it is. This was a short month, as everyone knows about February.
Yeah.
But
30
also
days have September, April, June, and November. All the rest have 31 except for February because it's fucked up.
Yeah.
That's how the run goes.
Is indeed fucked up. I'm sure you've seen that news report about February.
No.
Oh, we'll talk about it later. I've talked about it too much on podcasts this month.
Okay.
Anyway, yeah, like technically we are within guidelines to do the Q&A this week, although it is a short month, so it hasn't been that long. But also, I think we have an exciting guest episode coming up, hopefully soon.
We have a couple of exciting guest episodes coming up.
Yes. So that we decided to go ahead and knock out the Q&A this week to make room for some fun guest action coming in the near future. One of those I'm very excited about. I mean, I'm excited about all of them, but the one that is like...
I'm excited about both of them for completely different reasons.
What I mean is the one that is enough in the works that we're pretty sure it's going to happen. The one that has a Google Doc attached to it is what I'm saying.
Oh, gotcha.
Like that one is far enough along that I'm confident we will...
You're stoked about it.
Actually do that one because we're making notes about it with the guest now.
Yeah. So anyway, turn your Qs into A's. Brad, we have a big giant list of Qs here. We've already burned like 20 minutes talking about nonsense and ice cream trucks. What do you got?
But that's this podcast, right?
I mean, kind of, but also,
all right.
Maybe not. Oh, well, hold on. While you're looking for a question, I want to thank everybody who signed up for the newsletter this week because it was very sweet and people were very excited. And if you'd like to know more, you can go to next.content.town, another fine Content Town product to check it out.
That's right. Let's come on down to Content Town.
That's what we say. Come on down to Content Town.
Oh boy. All right. I have not long ago registered my displeasure with the term content on a different podcast.
Look, this is an ironic Content Town.
Yes, I hope so. Well, then that's a great lead into the first email that I'm going to read here. Speaking of doing things ironically, Will in Vancouver, British Columbia. Hey, y'all, we pronounce .ca as the letters CA as in .ca, presumably because .ca sounds dumb.
Did you say .ca or did I say .ca?
No, I said .ca. I referred to, what was the candy site that we were talking about buying Smarties and stuff on last week?
I don't know.
Let's say, Canadian Candyco.ca is what I said.
I've never said .ca in my life. This is the one time that I'm in the right on pronunciation.
Here's a little secret for you.
Mm-hmm.
I said .ca because it sounds dumb.
Interesting.
That's what we in the business like to refer to as an affectation.
So it's like when I call .uk the ukes. Is that the same?
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Do you remember when Ryan Davis used to pronounce robot like robot?
Wait, that was a bit?
Of course it was.
Look. The one defining characteristic of Ryan Davis is that it was almost impossible to tell when he was serious about something when he was yanking a chain.
Well, okay. Apparently that is somewhat the case with me as well, because I don't go around saying .ca, except when I think it sounds funny on a podcast.
It was pretty funny. I didn't even clock it as the funniest thing. I was so tuned into the Smarties.
Also, it's funny because it sounds like .com, but it's not. That's the other reason. That's why it's so unsettling, because you hear 2/3 of it and think they're going to say .com, and then you're like, oh, where did the M go? That's not right.
Arguably .ca is better because it's one less letter. Like I would happily have a .ca website if I had the opportunity.
I mean, why are we not all just using .us?
Well, I mean, there's a thing.
Yeah, okay, there's that. There's also, did you know I actually registered a .us once?
Really?
You cannot apply privacy protections to the DNS records for a .us or the registry records, rather. You can't you can't anonymize the ownership.
You got to get that PO box. You don't want to have your home address up there.
Yeah. So I unregistered. I just had to eat the money I had registered the .us with right away.
Yep. I had a .pro at one point that I had to do the same thing on because it also would not let you privatize. Man,
domains have gotten to be such a mess. Like there are so many out there, like the kind of VIP premium type domains that just by default are like hundreds of dollars a year now.
I look at one day, Brad, the little town. I wonder if there's a town called Content. Is there a city?
There's got to be
named Content.
There's a town with just about any name you can think of at this point.
No, I don't see any town named Content at this point.
Well,
someday somebody's going to found a town called Content, Missouri or something, and they're going to be like, "Hey, man, we need to get our domain," and then they're going to come to us, and they're going to write a fat Content Town check.
Yep,
it's our ticket out of this hellhole.
Yep.
Wait, I like this hellhole. Anyway.
I don't mind telling you before I move on, the .us I registered was metrocity.us.
Metro City?
Metro City from Final Fight.
Wow.
I was pretty stoked about that domain until I looked at the registration on it and I was like, let's not.
It's a good choice.
Yeah. Let's see. Here is an email from Aaron. I actually have not read this entire email yet. You flagged it, so hopefully you've got something to say about it. I recently bought a neat little spectrum analyzer for work and thought I'd pass it along since it seems like something you guys would be into. It's called TinySA, and it runs open source software and seems like a community-driven project to provide a cheaper spectrum analyzer for radio hobbyists and the like. I work for a public utility and manage 2 large AMI networks for metering that use RF for communication, and I grabbed it for some basic spectrum analysis for testing equipment and potential interference. I haven't quite put it to the test yet, just tinkering with it so far, but I think it will end up useful. tinysa.org is the wiki. Very grassroots tinkery stuff.
I think that's rad.
Yeah,
I just thought it was a cool project and wanted to highlight it because I hadn't heard of that before, but it has very strong like Pine Sol and like the stuff that they do over there vibes. Which I thought was rad.
This thing does look cool.
Yeah.
It's just a little box with 2 coax jacks.
I was stoked that Aaron shared it with us.
And a screen on it. That looks neat. And the webpage looks very honest, I'll say. Like any open source project that has got a web page that looks like this, that is, let's say, of a style that was popular 20 years ago, is like, all right, they care about the project here, not a cool looking web page.
Yeah, this looks like a SourceForge web page from before they had 50 million ads on SourceForge pages. So
just a very basic little wiki.
Yeah, it's cool.
All right. You mentioned before we started recording, you were looking up core isolation. So I should read this anonymously signed email, I suppose.
Yeah, let's go for it.
I've never noticed this feature in Windows security before. Core isolation. I believe that's the kind of preceding page, the way they've got it rendered here with a little arrow.
Yeah.
So like from the core isolation page to the feature, which is called memory integrity. I only recently moved to Windows 11. Maybe it is new or more obvious here than in Windows 10. Wondering if you could cover what this is and does, and give any recommendations for why you would or would not turn it on.
So core isolation and memory integrity. Core isolation is the overarching name for all of the features that use virtualization based security. So they run core Windows processes in a hypervisor, like basically a VM that runs at the hardware level.
Oh,
so that malicious software that's running in Windows at user level can't interact with it or can't write into its memory spaces and stuff like that.
Yeah. Is this new in Windows 11? Because I remember when 11 came out, reading about a bunch of new virtualization and sandboxing stuff they had built into it.
If I recall, this is a Windows 11 feature. I don't think this ever got rolled back to Windows 10, but I'm not 100% on that.
Oh, I didn't realize that wasn't just like enabled by default in all installs.
Well, so it's whether it's enabled by default or not depends on a bunch of UEFI settings. So like if you don't have virtualization acceleration on in your UEFI, which is often off by default on consumer PCs and consumer motherboards, it won't toggle it on when you boot Windows the first time. Also, there's kind of famously so hold on. Memory integrity is a different part of that basically labels certain processes as high security processes and physically, again, uses the virtualization based protection to prevent other threads from being able to write to that memory through a variety of attacks and processes. The TLDR is that on gaming machines, on normal computers like a laptop or whatever, it's work machine, stuff that you have specific stuff on, you probably want to have this on if your machine supports it. They're good security things. It's a little bit of a performance hit. It's not the kind of thing you're going to notice if you're using Excel and web browsers and stuff like that. If you're playing games, there was a big thing a few years ago where a bunch of gaming hardware YouTubers came out and were like, hey man, these settings are eating 10% of your performance. And the actual number is between like 4 and 10%, depending on the benchmark and the test. If you turn off specifically the memory integrity thing, I have it off on this machine because I was testing something and then forgot to turn it back on. I'm probably at the end. Turning it on and off requires a reboot, which is the only reason I didn't do it before we started the shows, because I didn't want to have to reopen a bazillion windows. I'm probably going to turn it back on. I feel like the downside of running it is not as significant as the downside of not running it is not as good as the upside that you get from the extra performance in a handful of benchmarks.
Yeah, I tend to agree. Cyber is getting kind of scary out there. I'm increasingly pro security features on stuff like this. My memory integrity apparently was on by default as I pull it up here.
Yeah, so since you did a clean Windows 11 install recently, and I bet you turned on virtualization since you use VM sometimes.
Yep.
You were probably had it on by default.
Yep.
And just to be clear, like if you buy a laptop from Dell or Lenovo or something like that, it's going to ship with this turned on. It's not a bad feature. It's something that's definitely worth using. And the only time I wouldn't turn it on probably is on like a pure gaming machine that I don't do any downloading applications. Yeah. I don't download files from other people, none of that stuff.
Like if you literally just have a Steam install and you just log into it and play games and like nothing else, like a home theater PC, something that's under your TV or whatever, like that's probably fine. But anything that you put any sensitive information on, any personal data, I would not.
Or more have a threat surface on, like if you're downloading tools and stuff like that, or you're using different files from other people and all sorts of stuff like that. So
yes. Before we move on, speaking of computer security, I have successfully enabled Secure Boot on both of my computers after manually generating keys, signing the bootloaders on both machines, and then enrolling the keys into the UEFI. I'm very proud.
So did you back up your boot keys and all that stuff?
No, what took the longest, because the only information I could find was for fully purging all the keys from your UEFI and generating all of your own, which seems insane. Like, let's be real. That seems insane, because that's removing Microsoft signing keys, which ship with every new motherboard on the market.
Yeah, that sounds crazy.
Means you would have to sign your Windows bootloader and anything Windows is doing to make it work.
Nope.
So the thing that took me a little more time that I couldn't find any guides or information about was generating just one extra pair of signing keys and then enrolling that public key on top of what ships with the motherboard. So I finally figured that out, and I was very pleased when it actually worked. Now I still can't actually use Secure Boot on my NAS right now because I have to sign the ZFS kernel module that makes ZFS work on my NAS.
Nope.
Like Linux boots up to the point where it tries to load the ZFS module and then it halts on unsigned modules. So now I got to figure out how to sign my kernel modules. Anyway,
this way madness lies.
I'm almost there. I was like 90% of the way there. You know? And the cool thing is, if I set it up right, from now on, it should sign all of my kernel modules going forward as they are built.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah, so like I just have to do one-time setup once I figure that out, and then like any kernel modules that get compiled going forward just get signed.
I like that.
Yeah, computer security. All right, actually, we got one more email kind of in the same vein, not exactly, but it's more Windows compatibility stuff that I feel like I want to touch on.
There's a couple about Windows 10 EOL if you want to talk about those.
That's the one. This one from Clifton here.
Yeah.
You guys have been discussing October of 2025 and Windows 10. That's for people who don't know, that's the end of life date for Windows 10 when they theoretically are going to stop supporting Windows 10 unless they push that out, which I personally
I don't think they're going to. No.
I mean, they did it with 7, did they not?
They've already pushed this one out a little bit.
They did extend the 7 EOL like significantly, didn't they?
Yeah, but I think the difference is that Windows 11 is a much better product than Windows 8 was.
Fair. I didn't consider it that way. I forgot about the product subsequent to Windows 7 that they were trying to paper over.
I'm going to go ahead and tell you the number of people who, when you're like, yeah, Windows 8 really stunk, and they look at you with a blank stare like, what the hell are you talking about? Windows 8 has been completely memory holed by so many people.
That I fully believe. I barely ran it. I think I went back to 7, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, you did. I'm absolutely positive you did.
Probably most people did.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know, maybe not. And also when you think about like the move to requiring the TPM, all the security stuff that's built into 11, I could actually maybe see them wanting to rip the Band-Aid off and just say, you know what, that's it.
It's a real choice. But anyway.
Yeah, in fact, actually, the question from Warbird from the Discord that I wanted to read right after this also touches on this subject. I imagine we're going to be talking increasingly about Windows 10's end of life as the year wears on.
I think there's probably at least 2 episodes in this, which we can talk about in a sec.
Yes. Anyway, here's this email from Clifton. You guys have been discussing October 2025 and Windows 10. So I went to upgrade to 24H2 on my Dell Optiplex 3020. I currently run Windows 11 Pro 22H2. I know this is a lot of version numbers and years and stuff here, so I just want to reiterate. Clifton is already running Windows 11 Pro 22H2.
Yeah.
I am getting told I cannot upgrade. Dell shows my machine is not Windows 11 capable. Do I own a brick now? All I do with it is pay bills, job search, and occasionally CNC design through easel. So, again, in other words, he's already on a version of Windows 11, but trying to upgrade to the current version of Windows 11, it's telling him his machine is not compatible with Windows 11. So what do you got?
Okay, so the problem is almost certainly that they don't have the appropriate kind of TPM, which is a security module.
Well, would that not have prevented Windows 11 install in the first place?
Well, it's funny you say that, because for a while you could install Windows 11 without a TPM.
I knew that, but if this machine came from Dell, though, wouldn't everything have been on the up and up with the install?
So I looked up the machine and the specific machine they gave. They gave me did I not embed it? I didn't. It's a 4 series Intel CPU, which is before the TPM2 was available.
Oh, wait, as in 4th gen?
Fourth, Intel Core 2 for something 4957, I think, if I remember right. So it's probably actually not supported. There's a lot of machines in the kind of mid, the like I think it's Sandy Bridge on. You could put a TPM module onto the motherboard. There's a header for it. It looks kind of like a USB header, but it's not.
Yeah, my Z170 board that I ran a KB Lake, a 7700K in for a long time as a TPM header on it. I never bought a TPM for it because what did I know about TPMs in 2017? But,
well, and some of those were TPM 1.0 headers as well, which are not supported.
So this came up on the Discord a few days ago. I was talking to some people on there about it. The consensus seems to be that 8th gen is the first gen that is like 100% definitely for sure compatible with Windows 11.
Pretty consistently 8th gen, if you have the right motherboard, is okay.
Yeah.
My 9th gen machine, I was able to flip a toggle in the BIOS and it just worked.
Yeah. But it sounded like an open question for 7th gen and earlier that even if you did put a TPM on that header on your board, it may or may not still meet the requirements. Was the sound of things?
Well, yeah. And there's also a 16 gig memory requirement too. So the machine that he has is configured with not enough RAM, and also the TPM is a problem. The nice thing is it's a pretty old computer at this point. I think the thing I would do is look at like B-Link and B-Link and MSI and ASUS all have small form factor boxes that are essentially they're going to be smaller than that machine. They're going to be a lot more powerful. And they'll be like, you can get a 10th gen dual core, quad core Intel B-Link often for under $150. And that's probably the path I would take for this problem. Or the other option is there's a lot of Linux that will run very well on this era machine.
Yeah.
It doesn't have the TPM requirements, and it'll actually run much better with 8 gigs of memory than even the Windows 10 will.
Yeah. We should probably do a desktop Linux episode at some points. That's what my whole secure boot odyssey was actually just a prelude to. We've talked about this before, setting up Refind, the boot menu on my PC, which I now have on here. And like I spent a few minutes theming it, and it's actually pretty awesome. It looks pretty similar to, how when you hold down an option on a Mac when you boot it, and it just shows like the different OS boot options it has found. It's basically exactly that. So it's kind of cool to have that. But anyway, the whole point of setting that menu up was to have a fallback for slapping multiple Linux distros on this machine. So I think maybe once we spend some more time with that, we should maybe do a thing.
And it's interesting because one of the biggest questions I've got on the newsletter is about Linux for this October 2025 problem. I have used in the past, I think it's called Chrome Flex.
Chrome OS Flex,
yeah. Which is Google's like, hey, you have a laptop that's too old and you want to put Chrome OS on it. OS.
Is that like the like real ass Chrome OS experience of like everything is like a menu and an icon and you don't really have access to the file system and stuff? Or
it's like Linux that you can't use any of the Linux stuff on.
Right,
so it's not like, if you just need a web browser, it's great for that. If you need to run some applications, maybe is not ideal.
Yeah.
Also, I was wrong on the system requirements for Windows 11. It's 4 gigabytes of RAM, not 16.
Yeah, so,
I can't imagine using Windows 11 with 4 gigabytes of RAM.
Before we move on here, I want to allow for the possibility that he may have there may just be a typo here, and that he meant he was on Windows 10 Pro 22H2, because being on a 4th gen machine, like there's no realistic possibility of getting Windows 11 onto that machine unless you kind of knew that you were circumventing the requirements anyway. So
no, you could do it. If you built your boot key using Rufus, you could flip a flag that would skip the TPM requirement.
That's what I mean.
There were a bunch of how-tos on it.
To do that, you would have to know that you had done that, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, they did it on 110. I'm looking at their system about page right now. They did it on the 10th of January in 2023. And the version they have is 22H2. So it is like, just to be clear, I had done the exact same thing with my Core i9 9900K machine when the TPM was disabled, or alternately, I had disabled the TPM after I did the install. I don't know which one I did, but I was in a situation where I was stuck on 22H2 and it wouldn't upgrade me any further.
Interesting. Windows 11, you mean?
Windows 11, yeah.
Man, what a mess.
It's like, just to be clear, Microsoft is handling this spectacularly poorly.
Yeah, I mean, sure, but it's also just a very complicated issue in general.
But it's antithetical to the entire ethos of Microsoft, which is, hey, your old stuff is always going to work. and they're going to abandon 1 billion computers.
Yeah, you're
when
not
when
wrong,
they flip the switch in October.
I mean, I think this was always going to be a messy transition though, because like it's kind of like the move from BIOS like legacy booting to UEFI though, right? It's like the BIOS, and I didn't realize this until recently. Like the BIOS has its origins in the literal original ass IBM PC from the early 80s. You know, like at a certain point, like we were on legacy systems for long enough that they are just holding us back, and it's time to move on. And the transition is always a mess.
Yeah, but like the transition from the BIOS to the UEFI stuff was happened over 3 versions of Windows, because it started with Windows Vista 64-bit, if I remember right, and then happened with Windows 7 and Windows 8, and it wasn't until Windows 10 that it was a requirement. Maybe not even Windows 10.
Right. I don't think it's even a requirement in 10, is it? I think you can.
I don't remember.
I think you can boot regular BIOS MBR with Windows 10. Yeah, I think.
But that's my point. Is like having this hard requirement when it's fairly arbitrary for the and leaving all these machines that don't support this, that are less than 10 years old in some cases.
Yeah, I mean, you could argue it's a little too aggressive. Like they could have waited for Windows 12 to enforce this requirement, and by then most of the machines that lack this hardware probably would be out of use.
Yeah,
or quite a few of them. Anyway, all right. Since I already brought it up, we'll go ahead and read this question from Warbird from the Discord. Entitled, "Do I even keep using Windows?" I'll condense this one a little bit, because this is less about sticking with Windows 11 and more like, does the average person even need a Windows machine in general? With EOL of Windows 10 approaching, I'm finding myself at a bit of a loss as to what to do regarding the Windows desktop in my home. With 2 kids and my spouse and I working full-time jobs, I primarily find myself using my MacBook Pro for quick or interruptible tasks. When able, my Windows machine hasn't really been powered on much at all in the last year or so. And even then, it's basically only for games, which have also taken a huge hit in the time spent metrics. I honestly can't really think of a reason to keep a Windows machine around beyond edge cases like Windows-only software or games that don't play nice with ARM and or virtualization. I'm half thinking it would be best to just grab a Steam Deck for easier and more interruptible gaming with suspend mode than the Mac offers, and either ditching running Windows on a desktop entirely, or at most getting a small form factor setup with modest settings, which is exactly what you just described on the last email.
Mm-hmm.
I've kind of increasingly been thinking for a long time that people who don't need specific things about, or don't have specific needs that a Windows desktop meets, probably don't need a Windows desktop anymore.
Like if you don't need a big giant discrete graphics card, I would much rather have a laptop.
Or even if you do, in a lot of cases now, you can get an external enclosure for the graphics card and plug it into a laptop or a little B-Link or something. I mean,
so the external enclosures, we've been doing some testing on them over at PC World, and Adam really likes them a lot. They're definitely up and down on whether they're usable and whether you're getting they're definitely a compromise solution for that, right? Because even the best external enclosures are going through some other weird interface, and like you're not getting full PCI Express lanes, you're getting an old version of PCI Express, or there's something else in the way that's making your video card run slower. The reasons I like desktop PCs are that they're appliances, right? They're relatively quiet. They're always on. When I need big muscle, then the fans spin up and they start generating heat, and I'll warm up my whole office.
Yep.
But for the most part, they're it's just a computer that's always available.
Yeah. But for people who aren't doing like heavy streaming or media work or things that require like a workstation, and obviously the market has reflected that with the massive move toward laptops, right? Like I think laptops and tablets dwarf desktop PC sales at this point, right?
Laptops are orders of magnitude larger than desktop PC sales at this point. Even all-in-one, even if you count in like all-in-ones and stuff like the B-Links. The other thing that's happened over the last few years is if you want to spend a little tiny bit more money, you can get something that's like an APU. You can get B-Links that have APUs from AMD, and then you get a really nice CPU and a decent, like better than integrated, not quite as good as discrete graphics all in the same die. And they're more expensive than the Intel options, but like it's essentially what's in a Steam Deck, and then you can put whatever you want on it. You put Windows, you put Linux, whatever you want.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm a big fan of the Steam Deck. If you want something that's like the one thing I will say is you're not going to do 4K gaming on an APU or a Steam Deck, right? You're going to play 1080p at the outside, and it's compromised, but that's probably fine.
Indeed. Here's a question from Cat Will Mew. What's the difference between M.2 and NVMe anyway?
M.2 is the socket and NVMe is the protocol that runs across the socket.
Yeah. Yeah. And NVMe is basically, well, let me back up. M.2, like you said, is the socket. It can be both NVMe or SATA or technically other things.
They're keyed differently, but yeah.
But like typically most sockets, I mean, check your motherboard manual, but most sockets or quite a few sockets can take either an NVMe drive or a SATA drive.
Typically on modern motherboards, you might have one socket that has SATA that will work with SATA and the rest are PCI Express.
Yeah. I mean, so, there is the element of SATA just kind of declining slowly from consumer boards in general.
Well, yeah. And the thing about the SATA ones, I have one I found one the other day when I was cleaning up my desk and I don't know what I did with it now. So they're keyed opposites. So the SATA ones have a key on, if you're holding the drive with the contacts up, the key's on the left side, and the PCI Express ones are on the right side. The NVMe drives will give you a dramatically faster connection between the drive and the computer than the SATA ones will. The SATA is limited to SATA speeds, which is like 6 gigabits per second. And the NVMe drives run at PCI Express lanes, so like 20, 40, 60 gigabits per second.
Right. Yeah. NVMe stands for non-volatile memory express. It basically is just the storage standard for PCI Express.
Yeah. And it contains, it basically tells your computer how to talk to an SSD.
Yeah.
Directly.
Yeah. But the M.2 socket is also an interface to just the standard PCI Express bus in the computer in general. So you can also find peripherals like USB controllers or extra SATA controllers or network cards.
You can get, I believe that you can get M.2 to PCI Express slot bridges now.
I would believe that.
You plug a thing into your M.2 slot and then it just turns into a PCI Express slot that you can just jam a normal ass card in.
I would believe that.
Yeah.
Actually, yeah, I think that esoteric or like weird M.2 accessories is like a very interesting category of thing.
I don't, it's funny. I didn't see a whole lot of SATA, like in the SATA days, you didn't see a whole lot of M.2 weirdness. It was basically just a handful of SSDs and it was mostly for mobile stuff. Cause there was like on the desktop, you'd be better off using a PCI Express SSD or just using a normal SATA drive because they were cheaper.
Right. But anyway, yeah. Question from Patch. In the USB power supply world, there has been, they're talking about like little wall wart USB chargers. In the USB power supply world, there have been a huge rise in gallium nitride. Some of these now provide up to 500 watts. God, really?
I didn't know that they go up to 500 watts.
Like last I checked, they were hitting like 200 watts, which already sounded kind of scary. Some of these now provide up to 500 watts of simultaneous charging across multiple ports in a relatively small size. How come we haven't really seen this happening in the PC power supply space? I feel like there is a gap there, especially for small form factor PSU.
There's not a ton of good answers on this when I looked at like why it isn't happening other than some fairly obvious ones, I think.
Yeah, I mean, the little bit I was able to find about this is basically just that it's more expensive from a materials cost standpoint and that what they're already using in consumer power supplies for PCs is doing the job well enough that it's probably not worth jacking up the prices. I was able to find one made by Corsair. It is the AX1600i. It's a 1600 watt power supply with using gallium nitride transistors. It's $610.
That's a pretty spendy PSU.
That might offer a clue as to why they are not using gallium nitride in a lot of PC power supplies because, like, you know, competitive prices is absolutely the name of the game in that market, right? Like it's probably hard to justify to the average like gaming PC buyer to spend an extra $300 to $400 on a power supply for better heat.
Well, look, what if you put some really sick LEDs on it?
You might be on something. I mean, this thing comes with ARGB PSU cable strips. What does that even mean? Are these powered cable strips?
Probably they have lights inside the cable, the runners that go to the motherboard.
They absolutely do.
That's so sick.
Add more color to your PC with RGB PSU cable strips and add on for your PSU cables using a scalable design to fit any form factor cable, 100 individually addressable RGB LEDs each.
I mean, the other benefit of using GAN, these are labeled often GAN, capital G, lowercase a, capital N. When you look at USB chargers, they're more efficient, is my understanding as well. Yeah, so there's less waste. Right.
That's why they're able to get higher wattage and smaller form factor for the wall warts, I believe.
This is I've never seen this before. This is bonkers.
Yeah.
You also like if you're building a machine for a warm place, you probably keep efficiency up at this with these versus traditional. I think it's GAAS is the traditional ones. But yeah, I don't know. I for what it's worth, you can buy like micro ITX form factor power supplies that are like 1400 watts now. So it seems like making them smaller hasn't required anything particularly like novel materials or whatever.
Yeah.
So
yeah, and maybe if the gallium nitride materials cost comes down, you'll start seeing more of that. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I would assume so, but my guess is that the demand for those power supplies is so high that the it's going to go to the USB laptops more than anything else.
Sure.
Like I really care about the size of my power brick for my laptop, and I really don't care about the size of my power supply for my PSU.
Yeah.
I got a whole trough for it under there.
How do you feel about the size of the power brick for your graphics card?
I mean, look.
I don't know how this has become practically a PC only Q&A here, but here's a question from Annoyed and Tired. We were talking to Adam, our friend at PC World, the other day about this subject.
Mm-hmm.
Seems like power creep on GPUs is a real issue. Do you think there will be a GPU which requires people to plug their computer into a 20 amp breaker? This is slightly different from what we were talking about when we were talking to Adam the other day, and I invoked the Voodoo 5.
The Voodoo 5 6000. Yeah.
Voodoo 5 6000, which plugged directly into the wall. There was a power cable. It had a power brick and a cable that went straight from the wall into your graphics card.
If I recall right, it had a big giant external power brick that was about the same size as the one that shipped with the original Dell XPS laptops that had probably a GeForce 2 in it. I can't remember. But yeah, we had a test. They sent us a dev board of the Voodoo 5 6000 at Maximum PC. And I think it was I think it had a 4, like it was before the GPU nomenclature, but I think it had 4, like, it had 2 texture units per, it wasn't compute unit, but whatever, pixel unit. Anyway,
yeah,
it was.
I feel like that's something that gets glossed over a lot these days, that like people, especially people who are not around for early 3D accelerators in the 90s, that like the term GPU coming about with the GeForce 256.
Yeah.
Graphics cards were not GPUs prior to that by name.
Yeah, they were just triangle setup and texture cards, basically.
Right. So like talking about what hardware was on a 3D accelerator back then was a little more complicated, or not directly analogous to what we've got now.
Well, and it was interesting because I want to say like the original 3DFX Voodoo card had one triangle setup card and one texture card, if I remember right.
That might be right. Isn't that where the name TNT came from for NVIDIA? Wasn't it Twin Texel?
Oh, I didn't know that. I didn't remember that.
I believe it was NVIDIA Twin Texel is which I think Texel was basically like texture element, right? Yes. Yes. TNT suffix refers to the chip's ability to work on 2 texels at once.
Well, and then the Voodoo 2 was basically the same Vertex setup chip, just with 2 texture chips on it.
Right.
So you could apply to, because people were starting to do multiple texture passes in one game, which is really funny now, because like your modern video game scene does buttloads of texture of different they're not textures, but they're textures applied different ways for transparency and lighting and all the millions of things we do. So
shader passes and stuff like that.
But I guess everybody in games was using one for lights and one for the texture of the material back then.
Yeah, that seems right.
So that made Quake real fast, is the TLDR.
Yes. Anyway, like with all the hand wringing about the 12 volt H power cable and melting 5090s and stuff back in the news again, like, and we just throw all that shit out and just plug the graphics card straight into the wall. Like, what are we doing here?
The plugging the graphics card straight in the wall is not a fantastic solution, as anybody who had an Xbox One knows, because those power bricks get hot and you always put them someplace where they're not going to get good airflow. And
like those power bricks had fans on them. The Xbox power brick literally had a fan in it.
It was almost as like, the Xbox 360 was really loud. The brick was really loud. The Xbox One was pretty quiet, but the power brick was really loud. I don't want external power bricks. Tony, I've said this before in the podcast, but I interviewed, I think, Tony Tomasi of NVIDIA at like the GeForce 3 launch. And I asked him what the upper limit on what they could do was. And he pointed at the plug on the wall and was like, I think the most we can pull from this is 1600 watts. So to answer the question is, I don't think we're going to get to a point where we have 20 amp breakers required for PCs. But every watt of savings that the CPU vendors give us, the NVIDIA is going to take.
Probably right.
And if you want to hear more about the melting power connectors on the 5090, we talked about on the Full Nerd this week.
What's the 10-second TLDR there? Is it the card's fault or the cable's fault or user error? What are we doing?
The 10-second answer is that I'm not an electrical engineer. The folks who I tend to trust and are not kind of over the top with this kind of stuff feel like they're flying too close. Like they're trying to deliver too much power for 5090s explicitly over they're trying to deliver 575 watts over a 600 or 625 watt cable. There's also a fair number of cables that fit that spec that were rated for 475 watts that predate there's been 3 versions of the spec. There was the one that they rolled out with the 3080, which doesn't have the four communications pins. There's the 12 volt high power, which came out with the 4090. And then there's the 12 volt 2x6. They're all kind of compatible with each other, but their spec varies slightly between each other. And then the place that it seems like you have problems is if you have a failed connection on one or more of the load wires. And rather than detecting that there's some problem with the cord, it just pushes all of the current over the wires that are working, which causes them to overheat and potentially cause problems, is what it seems like is happening.
Well, great.
And we still, as always is the case, it's definitely a problem. It's unclear how many people it's affecting. It's also unclear if they're actually selling any of these cards because it seems like supply is still incredibly constrained. So as Elena said on the Full Nerd this week, like it's only going to be something that we learn what actually is happening if somebody's house burns down, probably. So don't run Furmark and leave your 5090 unattended.
Yeah. Furmark will heat up your machine.
Yeah.
Pretty substantially. Isn't the 12 volt H power cable design is an ATX thing, right?
So the 12 volt H power was an NVIDIA one. They got it into the PCI Express, the PCIe 3.0 standard.
ATX
as the 12 volt 2x6.
You mean ATX 3.0?
Is it ATX 3.0?
I've got an ATX 3.0 power supply. I think they're up to 3.1 now.
Yeah, the 12 volt 2x6 is the standard. The NVIDIA one was the 12 volt high power.
Oh, so that was a design contributed to the spec by NVIDIA?
That's how it always works.
Oh,
yeah.
I thought it was a spec designed by consensus that was adopted by NVIDIA, which would make way more sense, I think. But anyway,
everyone else had their input into it. And there's slight changes between the 12 volt high power and the 12 volt 2x6.
Yeah. Yes.
Also, other thing, don't buy bootleg, or not bootleg, but don't buy janky aftermarket 12 volt 2x6 or 12 volt high power cables if you're using a 5090.
Yeah,
use the
was
ones that come with your power supply. Yeah.
Yes, that was the whole reason I asked, was because originally when this started happening with the 40 series, it was mostly all blamed on aftermarket. Like Cable Mod is one of the makers of like right angle.
Well, they had to do a recall.
Yeah,
they had to do a big recall. The problem with the initial launch of the 4090 was that people weren't getting the cables plugged all the way in. So again, all of the current was going over not all of the cables, and problems ensued. Right.
So that's why I was asking about on the 50s, like, is this happening with stock cables, not just aftermarket, like weird right angle stuff?
One of the ones I've seen was an aftermarket cable. One of them was a stock cable. One of them was a stock cable from a hardware reviewer who's probably done, as someone in our chat yesterday or the other day at the Full Nerd pointed out, probably has done way more than the 50 insertions that these cables are rated for, because they test video cards all the time. So it's they're flying too close to the sun.
Yeah.
Like you shouldn't be able to wear down an ATX power cable with 50 insertions, but also most people are never going to do 50 insertions on a 12 volt high power.
Yeah, my stance on this is that I am pretty pleased that I am happy at 1440p in terms of my performance needs, and also maybe slap a little power limit on your GPU, because you're not really going to miss anything.
Yeah. The nice thing right now is that the power limiter that's in the NVIDIA app, which is a relatively new feature.
They put that in there. I still use MSI Afterburner for that.
It doesn't work. The one that's in the app right now. It indicates that it works, but it doesn't work right now.
Well, maybe
at least on the 5 series.
Maybe continue installing MSI Afterburner for a while then. Yeah, that definitely works just fine. All right, let's do a couple of questions not about PCs real quick.
That sounds great.
Narfinger asks, trying to get away from Amazon, what are you using to read and buy ebooks? I've still got a Kindle. Like I bought a decent Kindle like 2-3 years ago that I have not moved away from yet. I mostly get books from the library though. So I guess that counts as kind of getting away from Amazon. And of course that only helps you if you have a public library nearby that serves ebooks onto Kindles.
There are a lot of public libraries that will give you a card for digital library loans, even if you aren't in their service area.
Yeah. I think we've talked about that before. I guess the SF one is so good here. I've never felt a need to go outside of it though. Yeah.
So I use Libby a lot for that. But through the San Mateo, Brad and I, despite living 10 miles apart, live in different counties. Libby's great, and it lets you dump books from its app over to the Kindle, so I can read them on the ebook reader if I want.
That's cool.
I've been buying stuff from Kobo lately. And then I also, Humble does a lot of DRM they do a lot. There's a bunch of books on Humble. Like I bought a complete Ursula K. Le Guin collection a few months ago for like $35. And I downloaded them for the Kobo store and then just stripped the DRM from them using Calibre and put them on the thing. Worth mentioning, if you're listening to this when the episode comes out, you have like 3 days left to download all of your Kindle purchases because Amazon is removing the ability to download the Kindle files and manually put them on your Kindle.
I didn't know you ever had the option to.
Yeah, because in the old days, the Kindles weren't connected to the internet, and you were allowed to download the Kindle, download the book, plug it into USB, copy the protected file over to the Kindle, and it would work.
Oh God,
they're turning that off.
So I need to do this. So to be clear, to get out in front of whatever policy change is coming, you just need to download the files as long as you got the files locally.
I think you need to download them and probably need to strip the DRM from them with Calibre before the change happens on whatever day, Tuesday or Wednesday. It's late. It's next week.
All right. I'll get on that.
It's for what it's worth. Calibre makes it very easy. So shout out to Calibre.
Okay. Question from Chip Shirley. Do y'all ever find yourselves changing your behavior on purportedly private digital platforms like a calendar or a reminder app due to skepticism over how private they really are? For example, I'll use something like Take RX as opposed to using an actual prescription name in a daily reminder. I think that is a fine idea personally.
I do things because I don't want them to be subpoenaable sometimes.
Okay, that's not the answer I was expecting. I mean, I think a more generic version of that is maybe always use digital technology with the assumption that somebody else might read it at some point.
I would argue that if you think that your calendar or to-do list are not secure, then you should probably change your calendar or to-do list app.
Yeah, but I mean, like human error always happens as well. Like it's not just the inherent security of the thing, like you might accidentally make something viewable to other people.
Yeah, that's true.
Like there's always the possibility that a slip up could happen even if the security of the actual product is sound. But, I think like drug names, like if, the names of the prescriptions you take might be a great example of information you would not want other people to have.
Yeah, I don't know. I try not to be paranoid about stuff like Google. And I know that there's widespread conspiracy theories about people saying something in front of their phone and then their phone showing them ads for the thing that they said about in front of. And like I stopped using Facebook because I did not put that past Facebook, right? That felt like a thing that Facebook would do.
Like that sounds like absolutely something that some of these companies would be willing to do, even if they're not currently doing it. I mean, I do think it is also possible that people do talk about subjects in front of their phone, but then maybe also forget that they also Googled those subjects at some point in the last 2-3 days. And like, hey, guess what? Your search history through data being sold to other companies follows you onto other services that run ads,
it's not even your search history. It's just that you ended up on a page with an ad that has a cookie from whatever company. And then you're in the Instagram, Facebook loop of ad happiness.
It is very easy to forget that you have come into contact with subjects that you are seeing ads for, in some benign way. And that's another way that can happen. That said, like you said, I mean, there have been scandals around like Amazon storing too much Alexa recordings.
Or Amazon leaving all the Ring footage for all the cameras that they collected on an open server in some Ukrainian data center.
Yes, like there are just way too many examples of companies being reckless with data that you would think is more buttoned up.
I tend to only put my data, like I don't have a Ring camera for very specific reasons.
Yeah.
But I do have a couple of Google Homes around the house, and I tend to trust Google, God help me, to not to be predictable and not unpredictable about how they handle the data they collect from those devices.
Yeah. Yes. There's an aspect of the Unix philosophy that I kind of have like tried to adapt to security a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
The thing in the Unix philosophy is that, you know, there's the whole thing about design the output of your program that it could be ingested as the input of a different and currently as yet unknown program, right? Like,
yeah,
hey, just make your program spit out data so that like if somebody else makes another program later on, they could take that input and use it intelligibly. Like I've kind of adapted that a little bit to like practice security for a threat model that is currently unknown or that does not quite yet exist. You know what I mean?
Oh, I thought you were going to say you live by the pipe and you die by the pipe.
I mean, I do. Trust me. I'm piping into grep and sed all day long over here. But
oh man,
no, I mean, like,
I
you know,
love a
like
good grep pipe.
I guess all I'm saying is like, you know, maybe like dialing your security up like one notch above where you currently need it is not the worst idea, because your needs may change at some point or your use case may change. And like later on, you might be glad that you put that work in. But, you know, I'm not saying go completely nuts, but
I think that's 100% true. Like you're never going to go wrong by being a little bit more conservative.
Yeah.
I don't think you need to be paranoid though.
Yeah. That said, I actually meant to touch on this earlier about the Windows memory integrity. I enabled Intel total memory encryption.
Oh no.
In my UEFI, I did it just because there's like a kernel error in Linux that pops if you don't have that turned on. And I turned it on just to make that error go away. Like it's not actually, you know what that does?
Isn't it going to make your computer really slow when you play games?
I didn't see. Well, that's on the server. That's not on my desktop. First of all, I couldn't find any evidence of a real performance penalty on that. The thing that protects against, though, is literal physical access to the data in memory.
So like if somebody puts a CAT scanner or something on the memory chips?
I think somebody would have to actually like physically probe the ICs on the on the RAM modules to get to that data, which I just thought was a very funny security measure to take.
Isn't that going to cause problems if your memory, if like a cosmic ray flips a bit on your memory?
I don't know. Well, I've got ECC memory in that, machine, so I probably am fine there. I might go back and look and see if there is actually a performance penalty. Like I said, I just turned it on to see if it would make that error go away.
Well, on the server, I wouldn't really care so much. On the desktop PC, I'd probably not flip that one on.
It's not a huge deal. Let's see here. One or two more quick ones here.
Yeah, we can do a couple more.
A couple people wrote in about bit rot. Here's one from Andreas 3000. Have you considered doing an episode on disk and data rot? As a believer in physical media, I got concerned about my Blu-rays and started Googling, and it's more interesting than I thought. It's hard to find any actual hard numbers on data loss per medium, and the impression I get is no one really knows. Internet Archive has started testing for disk rot, and their numbers are very low, but the PDF I read didn't give bytes or time spans. Watching some videos about it now, and it's turning into an interesting rabbit hole.
Yeah, it's really interesting because, like, you know, when you bought CD-ROM, CDR discs in like the early 2000s, they were like, hey, you buy the gold discs the last 20 years or 100 years or whatever. The only way they can test that is by doing fast cycles on temperature and light and stuff like that.
Right.
And the writable and especially rewritable discs have not aged well, is my understanding.
Yeah, I've got a bunch of, well, not a bunch, but I've got a decent number of kind of turn of the century, late 90s CDRs in the closet that maybe I should pull out and see if they work or not. That was, you know, I always heard, I think you always heard at the time the CDRs were not forever.
Well, especially if they're exposed to sun because they're an optical dye. Yeah.
But I think the more recent revelation is that even stamped discs, you know, factory made discs also don't last forever.
Yeah, on CDs, there's a problem where there's a metal reflective layer or like a mylar reflective layer in the disc that is protected with a little bit of lacquer. And if it's exposed at the edge of the disc and the edge of the disc wasn't protected, that it can get eaten away over time, basically.
Right. Yeah. Hey, look, entropy comes for everything. It doesn't matter if it was made in a factory or not.
Yeah. So the real answer to this is if you're worried about stuff, then you should just copy it off the discs.
Yeah.
And put it on a hard drive and then cycle the hard drives, plan to cycle the hard drives.
Yep.
This is a spinning discs hard drive, not SSDs every few years.
Yeah. SSDs are not great for long-term data integrity because, I mean,
they need power.
This is probably not likely in a normal use case, but, you know, if an SSD goes unpowered for long enough, it will lose the data on there. I mean, to be fair, that's like, I think that's now a period of years without power, but
the number I always hear is like once you get past 5 years, you're through the looking glass.
Yeah.
But I think that probably depends on model by model variants. And
what I mean, just to be clear, what I mean is like don't put like priceless family photos on an SSD and then put it in a safe deposit box.
Yeah,
and let it sit for a decade because there will likely be nothing left.
I mean, I think that there's an interesting story here. The other thing that they didn't touch on is the Internet Archive is doing some neat stuff about scanning the reflective layers, not with a CD-ROM drive, just taking a scanning electron microscope to look at them.
Wow.
So there's ways to get this stuff for priceless information, like commercial Blu-ray, commercial DVD, whatever. You're probably not going to care enough about to pull that data off. Yeah, I think it'd be a good topic for an episode because there's a lot to it.
Yeah, if you're talking about optical media, like it sounds like you are in this Discord question, just back those discs up immediately and put them on. This is where redundancy comes in. This is where having something like a NAS with some amount of redundant hard drives and also like a file system that does checksumming and data integrity like CFS or something similar. There are some others out there, but something that's able to check its own data integrity and fix problems from redundancy and parity is kind of a must if you want things to last forever, which they definitely will, right?
Apparently, according to Wikipedia, HD DVDs, especially those produced by Warner Brothers between 2006 and 2008, developed disk rot shortly after production.
Yep. Very well-known problem. I think I've talked about it, maybe a Giant Bomb, but not here. But yes, that was... I think HD DVDs generally did not last super long, but those Warner Brothers were basically defective. Like they worked for a very short time. Somebody sent their HD DVD drive for the 360 into Giant Bomb with their whole collection for it.
Yeah.
There were multiple Warner discs in there still in the shrink wrap. None of them worked.
Wow.
But literally the case had never been opened before, and I opened them all and put them in there, and none of them worked because they all were afflicted by that problem.
That's amazing.
Yep. Kind of a mess. All right. Last question here.
Okay.
From Grant, what would a printed podcast look like? Is it a transcript of the podcast, just a string of ones and zeros, a waveform over time sketched out on a seismograph?
I was thinking like a label printer with like a spool of the heat paper.
Okay.
Where it just does the waveform.
Yeah. All right. Sure. I can see it.
Yeah.
That would be the most cinematic, I think.
I think that's actually the coolest way to print.
Label, maybe seismograph has an actual needle, right?
Yeah, seismograph would be very fancy.
Like that's what I would vote for. I want to see the actual needle sketching the wave out.
I thought you were going to ask the next question.
Oh, one after that?
Yeah.
What about Fortnite?
Fork knife?
Okay, fine. We'll talk about. Okay, you can talk about Fortnite.
The kids love Fortnite.
I will abstain from JC. My kids and I have just gotten into Fortnite. Any tips on getting good, especially how to help the kids along? I'm slightly more than casual, so I'm doing fine for me. But I have no idea how to help 10-year-olds in their first shooter. Also, I can tell this game has a very tight reward loop and will be very addictive. Any tips on managing that with kids, given you've navigated it yourself?
Yeah, so my dog, we just played for a long time and she didn't care so much. And we got matched into bot games pretty regularly and romped bots. And over time, she learned to shoot pretty well. Mostly just by encouraging her to use the mouse and keyboard and helping her get default settings for the mouse that were good for her and that she could move and do what she wanted to. We're at the point now where she's like needs to learn how to like lead shots with one gun and then switch to another one when she gets up close and stuff like that. And that's been a little bit trickier, but she's interested. Like it took a long time before she was interested in getting good. For a long time, she just wanted to play because it was fun to hang out with dad and we got to go drive around in cars and stuff like that, which is totally fine. I would suggest no to very light pressure, depending on how your kid is going to react to that. The time it turns so the TLDR is in the last month or so, she started playing on her own when she has free time. She usually only plays like 2 or 3 games because it's pretty stressful for her. And she's like, the reward loop is good, but also she gets super stressed out about it and just doesn't want to play more. So I don't have a good answer for that. The parental controls that Epic does tells you how many hours each week your kid plays. So you can kind of keep track of it by keeping an eye on those emails. And yeah, like when they start wanting to play on their own because they want to practice some, that's when you start giving them advice on things like switching weapons and which weapons to use, and like explaining the difference between light ammo and medium ammo and heavy ammo and all that stuff and all that. Brad, if you want to learn to play Fortnite, I've done it once. I can do it again.
I'll keep it in mind. Yeah. I don't know. I'm having a good time with Void Crew right now. I think I might stick with that.
That game rips. It's really good.
Yep.
Check back Monday, maybe.
Yes. I'm dying to play more of it.
I literally was looking at the single player mode the other day and was like, I don't think I'm going to do this.
No, do it.
Do it.
Okay. Absolutely. You'll gain. I've racked up like 3 skill points in one session.
That's more than any. That's more skill points than we got the entire session on Monday.
Because that number was 0.
Yeah.
It is a good way. Void Crew it's kind of a space Sea of Thieves like. It's a multiplayer, like everybody crews a different system on your spaceship kind of game. And yeah, I would highly recommend getting in there with a single player ship and just learning all the systems so we can switch around more and know what's going on.
Yeah, that makes sense. I was explaining it to somebody as if you had FTL, as if you were playing Phasmophobia, as if you were playing FTL like it was Phasmophobia and there weren't a bunch of jump scares. Because I love the mechanics and all the prox chat stuff and like Phasmophobia and Lethal Company and all those games, but I hate the jump scares. And I love science fiction stuff, and I love putting on space suits and going outside of airlocks, and it's very good.
Gotta get if you get 4 skill points, you can double the oxygen capacity of your spacesuit.
I love that. That sounds great.
Do it.
But that's, I guess, a place for us to wrap up our questions for this week.
Yep.
Brad, if people want to send emails in, they can send them to techpod@content.town, correct?
So I hear.
Or alternately, you can go to the Question Seeking Answers channel, soon to be called the Bottomless Question Hole, in the Discord.
Maybe.
I don't know if I'm actually going to change that, but I might.
I like Question Seeking Answers has got a nice aspirational vibe to it.
Local answers near you, hot answers near you. I don't know. But yeah, when you sign up for the Patreon, you get access to the Discord. You get access to the Question Seeking Answers channel. You get a monthly patron exclusive episode, which we have to record sometime in the next 10 or so days. And you might get your name read on the podcast. Like our executive producer tier patrons, including
will, in fact.
Well, 100% you will. Yeah, I guess that's a certainty. Including our executive producer tier patrons, Jason Lee, Andrew Slosky, Jordan Lippett. Bunny Crimes enthusiastically recommends next.content.town. I didn't put them up to that. They did ask if it was okay. Twinkle Twinkie, David Allen, James Kamek, and Pantheon, makers at the HS3 high-speed 3D printer. Since it's the end of the month, and I thought this was a fake end of the month, not the actual end of the month, but it's the real end of the month. We also thank our associate producer tier patrons, including Alejandro Navarro, Andre M. Burke, PE, Andrew Dicey Scholdice, Arthur Geese, Ben Tallman, Brutal Kerfuffle, Eric Klein, Felix Kramer, Graham Banks, Jad Rita, Just Associate Wedge, Matt Walker, Walkman 8080, Mike Etheridge, Nathan Phelps, Sanchit Kumar, Steve Lynn, Thomas Shea, Tom Hilton, and Xbox Playdates. So anyway, I guess that'll do it for us this week. We will be back next week with, if everything goes well, a special guest.
I hope so, yeah. Or maybe the week after. We'll see.
Maybe the week after. We'll see. But I hope everybody has a lovely, lovely week. And as always, please consider the environment before you print this podcast.